The next item on the agenda concerns the case of Doctor Denis Mukwege in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
The authors of the report, in order to see whether everyone is on the list in a right way. I have on the list Madame Bilde, Madame Ms. Matias, Ms. Yembo, Ms. Kanko, Ms. Arena, Mr. Vince, and Ms. Rees. Is it correct? Is anyone missing? That's the right order then. Okay, we change the papers. Köszönöm szépen. Elnézést a kis ügyrendi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Apologies for the complication. I'd like to give the floor to Ms.
Denis Mukwege is a gynecologist. He is a human rights activist. He has devoted his life to helping women who've suffered from sexual violence in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. For more than 20 years, Dr. Mukwege and his team have faced the worst atrocities perpetrated against women, young girls, even baby, raped, genital organs mutilated by criminals as part of armed groups who use this as a weapon of war. Thousands of women have been treated in the Panzi hospital since it was set up. Sadly, these attacks have not stopped. Recent attacks in the Ituri province, which have been qualified as crimes by Madame Bachelet, and the issues in Kivu province are also very concerning. We call very clearly for an end to impunity, referring to the mapping report. Everybody should take their responsibilities here. Denis Mukwege calls on the DRC to guarantee the protection of its populations and the demilitarization of these areas. He calls on the international community to support the judicial process in the DRC with the establishment of mixed tribunals. He also calls on the international community to pursue those who have perpetrated these crimes against humanity as identified in the mapping report, and to support the creation of an ad hoc tribunal. The ICC sadly is not competent in this matter, as we all know. These statements that he has made have led to more threats against him, which need to be taken very seriously. His first hospital was destroyed in 1996. He was threatened in 2012, and he's being threatened again today. We need to provide him with effective protection, and we need to ensure that this does not continue in the DRC. We will be able to protect Dr. Mukwege in the best way by doing this and allow him to continue to work as a human rights activist. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
The next speaker is Mrs. Bilde.
Les attaques et intimidations visent
attacks and intimidation that we're seeing since 2012 all the way up until 2020 that targets medical staff in the DRC who is in a country that's suffering by a terrible conflict. This goes back to 1999, and in the hospital of Panzi, 55,000 victims have been treated, given medical care, re-given their dignity. People who have suffered violence as part of this crisis. Now, what else is being offered to them? No compensation, no support for families. The European actions seem to have no impact whatsoever. The international actors fail to take responsibility. International community, when faced with this crisis in Africa, is not sending support, and tragedy results, sadly.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Matias is next.
Chair, I ask you not to count this as intervention. I think it's more correct if after the colleague who negotiated the resolution, then we have all the authors according to the own method. So I'm more than happy to speak last. So give the floor to the colleagues from the correct order as usual. They know who they are, so I'll be speaking last.
Just to understand correctly, Madame Matias, you are not author. because on the list you are...
I am, but I'm from GUE, and I know that we normally follow the own method, so we can pass to the EPP, then Renew, and then I'll speak last very happily, but not to generate any confusion. Sorry.
I'm really sorry for the confusion. The lists are still a little bit incorrect. So the next speaker is then Mr. Vince from EPP.
Thank you very much, Chair, and appreciations for the colleague to use the speaking time on the weight of the groups. It takes extreme bravery to be an outspoken defender of human rights in a state crippled by decades of corruption and armed conflict, and in which rebel militia groups continue to abduct, rape and murder civilians without impunity. Dr. Denis Mukwege, renowned gynecologist, pastor, Nobel and Sakharov Prizes laureate from the Democratic Republic of Congo, has dedicated most of his life to end the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war and armed conflict. Nearly 55,000 survivors have been treated in Panzi hospital that he established in 1999. His courage, dedication and strength in denouncing wartime sexual violence made him the international symbol of this struggle. Now his life, that of his co-workers and members of his family, is newly and repeatedly under threat. It is our moral obligation that we defend them with all the means at our disposal. While raising our voice for Dr. Mukwege, we praise all human rights defenders in the Democratic Republic of Congo who still carry out their work in spite of the challenges they are faced with. The EPP Group welcomes the resolution that urges the government of the DRC to undertake immediately a comprehensive investigation into the threats he and other human rights defenders received. I also welcome that the document calls upon the Congolese government and judiciary to prosecute human rights abuses carried out against women in the country. We fully echo Dr. Mukwege's call for peace and justice, the defence of human rights, the need for accountability and the implementation of the UN Human Rights Report mapping abuses. Thank you.
Köszönöm. És akkor a következő hozzászóló Ries képviselő asszony.
Thank you very much indeed. I now give the floor to Madame Ries.
Thank you, Marisa. This was really appreciated. Le Dr. Mukwege.
Dr. Mukwege is a hero. He's a hero for Congolese women. He repairs them. He gives them their taste for life back and restores their dignity. And he has supported the struggle of all victims of sexual crimes. He is a hero for human rights activists around the world. His courage can only arouse our admiration. He's a winner of the Sakharov Prize. He does not fall silent. He takes on the full risk, which is huge in his country. Our responsibility is, one, to protect him and those close to him. Secondly, to support his call for justice for the victims of the conflict that ravages his country. Well, yes, the conflict is back. Panzi remains a refuge. For how long? We don't know. The UN protection is temporary. We have to do work on memory, remembering these crimes, and continuing the continuation of the work of the Panzi clinic. Europe has to go beyond words. It has to follow up with acts, and that's what our text is calling for.
Szépen. Következő hozzászóló Jambó képviselő.
Thank you very much indeed. Mrs. Jambó is next.
Szólások van.
May I ask everyone to please respect the speaking time. 1 minute.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Today, Parliament professes its support for Dr. Mukwege, the man who defends women, because he is facing death threats, very sadly now. We call on the DRC to intensify its fight against all forms of violence and, under the aegis of the UN, to put into place a legal system to try the crimes of the past and the present, but also to respect sexual and reproductive rights, including the legalization of abortion in the event of rape. Let's not forget that there are mining activities which threaten people's safety and are linked with violence. Now, we cannot say that we are respecting everyone's rights when we use our smartphones every day and are about to switch to 5G. Dr. Mukwege, but all the wider community of the Sakharov Prize laureates, we thank them for defending the rights, and Parliament honours you.
És akkor most az én listámon.
Thank you very much indeed. Following my list, according to my list, it would be Ms. Matias next.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Denis Mukwege has dedicated his life to ending sexual violence against women as used as an arm of war. 57,000 surviving victims have been treated at the hospital in Panzi. His life has always been under threat, but these threats over the last few months have intensified. Sexual violence against women in a war context is something that cannot continue to be subject to impunity. And that's why on 13th of September there was an important judicial decision taken to try and end impunity. But violence continues in this region, largely thanks to foreign groups who are exploiting minerals. The international community has to support the human rights defenders in the Congo. They cannot allow crimes to remain subject to impunity, and we cannot allow the companies involved in extractive industries to not take their share of responsibility.
Asita Kanko.
Ms. Asita Kanko.
Yes, thank you. I think on the screen nothing is clear anymore, but thank you. So years ago, I was honored to interview Dr. Mukwege for a book I wrote on women's rights. He inspired me with his simple belief that we all have a duty to do the right thing. He is not a man who thinks women's rights is an issue for women. He just jumps in and fights. He said, I became a feminist because in the face of the atrocity I witnessed, I had a choice, to go away or to act. I couldn't just leave. The EU must do all it can to protect the points of light that shine through darkness. For the many thousands of victims of sexual violence in the Congo, Dr. Mukwege is that light. We must call for a deep and impartial investigation into the threats made against him. And the EU must urge the Congolese authorities to adopt the draft law which protects human rights defenders and installs transitional justice. By defending Dr. Mukwege's life, we also defend the lives and dignity of those that every day rely upon his bravery. We must do all we can to help him continue to fight for the change he spent a lifetime trying to achieve, the delivery of justice, truth, and the empowerment of women. Thank you.
Köszönöm szépen, és akkor a vitát a képviselőcsoportok nevében történő hozzászólásokkal folytatjuk.
Thank you very much indeed. We now move to the speakers on behalf of groups. Mr. Hartman is next from the EPP.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani przewodnicząca.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about Dr. Denis Mukwege, the person who won the Sakharov Prize, also the Peace Nobel Prize. In Panzi, the hospital is the biggest hospital that is helping the victims of sexual crimes. And Mr. Mukwege has spoken very openly and many, many times against using sex crimes as a weapon of war. Now we have to stand up and be counted and protect Dr. Mukwege because of his actions, he is now being threatened. Not only him, he is threatened, his family is being threatened, and also the people who are working in the hospital. And he escaped even one attempt of assassination. So we have to realize that this threat is very, very real. We cannot stand with our arms down. We have to act, and we have to also call upon the Republic of Congo to investigate into the threats. The authors have to be put before before courts. Today's debate should also serve to talk about the problems that Mr. Mukwege is trying to solve. We realize that sexual crimes are there and we condemn them, but we cannot just talk. We have to walk the talk. So we have to really offer help for victims.
Köszönöm szépen. Következő hozzászól a szocialisták és demokraták képviselet.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, Mr. Zorino for the S&D. In the Congo, sexual assault and violence is used as a weapon of war. The man defending them and treating them is Doctor Denis Mukwege, Sakharov Prize, Nobel Peace Prize laureate. The United Nations, African Union, all must stand by him and speak out against violence that is used to trample on and mow down pillars of the society. The denouncing of yet another massacre in Kivu and the continued use of violent sexual and threat to physical integrity of people must be condemned, with the situation worsening under the pandemic. We must ensure that judicial services can function properly and that all perpetrators of violence and rapists are brought to justice. I stress once again that I show solidarity to Dr. Mukwege, his extraordinary work, his fight against sexual violence and his action against terrorism. Thank you very much indeed. Ms. Votmans is next.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I am outraged. I am shocked. I am extremely worried that we are having to talk about the safety of Dr. Mukwege. I think this shows at what level we have impunity now in this region. This man who needs no introduction, Sakharov Prize laureate, Nobel Prize laureate, but particularly a hero for an entire people. He is the voice for women who have been raped. He is a bastion against suffering and terror and executions. It is our duty to strengthen that rampart he has built. Someone who shares the fundamental rights. It is important that we ensure peace remains. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Anderson from the ID Group.
Dr. Mukwege deserves my greatest respect. His efforts against terrible sexual violence against women and girls and their terrible consequences. They have tried to silence him and threaten him and his family with death. These threats have to be condemned firmly, and we have to constantly state our solidarity with him, but we also need to act. Congo has been sliding further and further into violence. Attacks on women by militias take place every single day. 5 million refugees, tent camps. And the perpetrators are protected by high-ranking military officials. And there's a sense of impunity through the courts. But the real scandal is that while systematic violence against women takes place, the Congolese government is continually supported by the EU. 40 million euros in humanitarian aid is being provided. The EU is going to have to critically analyze its relationship with Congo. We cannot have Dr. Mukwege putting his life at stake to protect women in future.
Thank you. Ms. Wisniewska is the next speaker from the ECR Group.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Denis Mukwege, who has won the Nobel Peace Prize, the Sakharov Prize, a very courageous doctor who, with a huge determination and also with huge effectiveness, is fighting sexual crimes and sexual violence against women and girls, who is talking about impunity of the authorities, who is speaking against those crimes and their perpetrators. Now his life is at stake and our moral obligation is to protect him. So we call upon the UN and the Congolese government to protect Denis Mukwege, his family and his collaborators in the Panzi hospital. We have to also extend a helping hand to those who fight against sexual violence, and we have to help the victims.
Thank you very much indeed. Ms. Wiesler Lima is next for the EPP.
Le docteur Denis Mukwege est une personne admirable. Il a dédié la plus grande partie de sa vie.
Dr. Mukwege is an admirable and incredible person. He has dedicated his life to saving women who have become victims of the war. In 2008, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize and followed the awarding of the Sakharov Prize. It shows to what extent he is dedicated to peace, but it also means that we have a greater responsibility as members of this parliament. We must allow this man to continue to defend human rights. The threats against his life are a clear result of his tireless efforts to put an end to the impunity that victims are suffering in many provinces of the DRC. We forcefully call on the Congolese authorities to ensure the safety of Dr. Denis Mukwege and that impunity can no longer exist and perpetrators are brought to justice. We also call on the international community to intensify its efforts to ensure that sexual violence can no longer be used as a weapon of war, to defend victims and to provide guarantees and reparations to victims. Thank you.
Hozzászóló Evelyn Regner a Szocialisták és Demokraták képviseletében.
Thank you very much.
Evelyn Regner is the next speaker.
Rape is not just a physical violent act perpetrated against one victim, it's an assault on humanity. And these are words by Denis Mukwege. Dr. Mukwege has dedicated his life to the treatment of women who have become victims of rape and horrendous sexual violence. He has given new hope to tens of thousands of women, supporting them on the way back through medical treatment and psychological counsel, giving them the chance to get back on their own 2 feet by providing them with an education and job training. So he needs our support to ensure his safety and that of his family and of the staff. Women are amongst the most vulnerable in conflicts across the globe. Using sexual violence as a weapon in a war is a terrible crime. So Denis Mukwege is one of the big heroes of our time. He needs our support and he deserves it.
Következő hozzászóló Rafaela.
The next speaker is Ms. Rafaela.
Madam Commissioner, I welcome Nobel Peace Prize winner Dr. Mukwege's call for protection and the resolution in support for this. We know that conflict has horrible consequences for the countries concerned, for the many women victimized. And as Dr. Mukwege correctly said, we need to recognize that sexual violence in conflict is not just a problem in his country. Therefore, it is important that people like Dr. Mukwege can continue their important work that not only helps the victims, but also advocate for women's rights. Dr. Mukwege and his Panzi hospital is an example of how activists who do the groundwork need and deserve our protection. A pandemic cannot be an excuse to look away. Our support, especially during a crisis, is desperately needed. I call on our institutions, our parliament and the international community to ensure that people like Dr. Mukwege are free and safe to continue their work. Thank you.
Következő hozzászólók a Szocialisták és Demokratáktól.
Thank you very much indeed. Evin Inchir is next.
Madam President, Commissioner, There can be no rest that is not rest for all. There can be no silence until all our work is complete. That's a quote from the former UN Secretary-General, Dag Hammarskjöld. These are words that we should take to heart when fundamental human rights continue to be breached all around the world. We have to support the forces that fight for human rights around the world. Dr. Mukwege is a fine example of how courage, persistence and hope can achieve so much for human rights. But as is all too often the case, for those who stand up for human rights, he and his colleagues have faced constant threats because of their important work. We should welcome the fact that Dr. Mukwege is back under UN protection, even if only temporarily and in response to international pressure. But what's unacceptable is that such pressure was necessary. What sort of signal are we sending out to human rights defenders, that they have to stand alone in their moment of danger? No, it's enough. The EU must be more active globally for women's rights as part of a genuine feminist foreign policy, and we should continue to actively dialogue with the UN to improve the situation of the human rights defenders who are constantly, daily under threat for other people's freedom.
És akkor a bizottság nevében megadnám a szót Urpilainen asszonynak, hogy válaszoljon az itt
Now, on behalf of the European Commission, Ms. Urpilainen has the floor.
President, I am grateful to the members of the European Parliament for raising this matter and for giving me the opportunity to address it here. The European Union greatly admires the courage and the tireless work of Dr. Denis Mukwege. His strong commitment to peace, justice and human rights in the East of Democratic Republic of the Congo has exposed him to death threats, unfortunately. Despite that, he continues to devote his life to defending and restoring the dignity of countless women victims of brutal acts of violence. And we must continue to support his work. We have publicly condemned the most recent threats made against him, and we are pleased to note that the UN has now decided to redeploy a unit for the safety of Dr. Mukwege and the staff and patients of the Panzi hospital. Honourable members, we remain extremely worried about almost daily attacks on the population in the east of the DRC. This cannot become a forgotten crisis 10 years after the UN mapping exercise report. We are calling upon the DRC, supported by its international partners, in particular in the region and MONUSCO, to put an end to the violence and the impunity. Congolese authorities should adopt and implement reforms to establish effective security institutions and an independent justice sector. Those responsible should be brought before justice so that the rights and dignity of the victims can finally be recognised. The EU is taking concrete action in this direction through support programmes for justice, strengthening of mechanisms for prosecuting and supporting victims, including survivors of sexual and gender-based violence, and continue its direct support to Dr. Mukwege's Panzi hospital, which so far amounts to €19 million. We will never abandon the women and girls who had to go through the unspeakable pain of sexual violence and stand ready to contribute to the support they need to rebuild their lives. Thank you.
Ezzel a vitát lezárom, a szavazásra szintén a mai napon.
That closes the